Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a time when survival didn't just depend on your strength, but on your will to endure the harshest of elements. Imagine waking up in a medieval winter. The cold hits you before your eyes even open. And you're not lying on a warm bed with a fluffy duvet. Nope, you've got a thin blanket if you're lucky. A few layers of wool or fur, and a bed that's more like a slab of wood with some straw. That's your reality. The warmth, well, that's a distant memory, or something you might catch for a few minutes next to the fire, if you're fortunate enough so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moment you wake up, that chill isn't just cold, it's a piercing bite that doesn't go away. Medieval winters were harsh in ways we don't even think about today. There's no central heating, no thick blankets made of goose, down just the thin fabric of your clothes, if you're lucky. And as you step out of bed, your feet meet the frozen stone floor. Every breath feels like it could crystallize in front of you, and there's no comfort to be found. Just the raw chill of winter that would make even the most resilient person want to stay buried in bed all day. But you can't, because if you stay in bed too long, you won't eat. And that's where the harsh realities of medieval life come into play. Survival. The cold was relentless, unyielding. You try to make your way to the hearth, where a small fire burns, but the room itself is poorly insulated. The windows may have glass, or they might not. Sometimes it's just wooden shutters to keep out the wind. And when the temperature dips below freezing, that wind cuts through even the thickest walls. Heat rises, so the closest to warmth you'll get is either standing on a stool near the hearth, or hugging the family dog who's been smart enough to curl up in front of the fire, leaving you shivering in the cold. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed in the effects of the cold, or if they simply had no concept of insulation and warmth beyond what nature offered. Some believe that many people back then had much higher tolerances for cold, given that it was a constant reality. Others suggest that the brutal winters led people to develop customs like layering clothes made of skins, wool, and furs that were seen as practical survival strategies. Either way, it wasn't glamorous or comfortable. It was simply life, grit, and survival, and trying to find warmth anywhere you could. Remember those drafty rooms? They weren't just uncomfortable, they were dangerous. The cold, damp air, combined with poor insulation, created the perfect conditions for mold, fungus, and illnesses to thrive. You could catch a chill by just sitting too long in the wrong spot, or your lungs could get infected by the dampness in the walls, which were inevitable when the heating systems were insufficient and fireplaces struggled to keep up with the need. For warmth, you weren't just dealing with the cold, you were fighting off the elements in ways modern folks don't even realize. So, as you stand there, trying to warm your hands over that feeble fire, you realize just how unprepared your ancestors were for this brutal reality, and yet they lived through it. Somehow, they survived. Now, as the hours drag on, the sun sets earlier than you expected, far earlier than it does in the summer, when long, lazy evenings stretch into the night. But in the winter, it's as though the sun has somewhere better to be, leaving you in a near-perpetual state of twilight. The days are shorter, colder, and bleak, and before you know it, darkness has enveloped everything, making your home feel even more isolated. And the worst part? There's no escaping it. You can't just flip a switch and turn on a light or use candles in every room to chase away the shadows. Your light is limited to whatever little glow your fire can provide, and it's not enough to keep the darkness at bay. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the darkness settles in earlier and earlier each day, the cold also becomes more pronounced. You can't escape it, even in your own home. The windows, if you even have them, are poorly sealed, allowing drafts of freezing air to flow in. That constant breeze only worsens the chill in the room. You'd think the fire would help, right? But even with logs burning, it's barely enough to ward off the cold. If you want any warmth at all, you're likely crowded around that single fire, pressed against a wall, or trying to huddle under the meager protection of the roof. It's crowded, and the atmosphere feels thick with discomfort. Historians still argue whether medieval people embraced the cold as an accepted fact of life, or if they really struggled with it in the way we imagine. Some argue that the people of medieval Europe may have had adaptations, smaller homes, perhaps, that were easier to warm, or clothing layers that actually helped manage the cold. Others believe they lived in a state of perpetual discomfort, with homes built too large to retain heat and windows letting in the elements. Either way, it's a cold one in the winter months. And here's something most people don't consider. When the sun dips below the horizon and the world falls into cold. Early nightfall, you're essentially trapped, unless you're willing to wrap. Up in blankets by a fire, your body will gradually succumb to the cold. But you can't just sleep the winter away, can you? You still have to get up and face the reality of the day. And no matter how much you layer yourself with wool and furs, it's just not enough to shield you from what's happening outside. In this unrelenting winter, sleep becomes a luxury. With darkness ruling the hours, you're stuck in a cycle of restless nights, with the cold seeping through every crack, every corner of the room. There's no real escape from your blankets are thin, your bed hard. And you've spent so many days on the brink of exhaustion that sleep itself doesn't come easy. And if you think you're getting some respite after the sun sets, think. Again, medieval winters bring not only the physical cold, but the toll on your mind too. There's something unsettling about the long nights, the bitter cold, and the absence of light. Every sound feels amplified in the stillness. It's not just the frostbite you're worried about, till it's the long stretch of loneliness that winter brings. Social life during the colder months is sparse, as people stay inside, clustering around fires in their homes. But even then, the coldness feels more profound as it leaves you isolated from the world. Historians still argue whether medieval folk resigned themselves to this unrelenting darkness and cold, or if they really feared it in the way we might today. Did they view winter as an inescapable burden, or as an integral part of the seasonal cycle? Some suggest it was simply the price of survival, while others argue that winter presented a significant psychological challenge that added stress to an already difficult life. Either way, it wasn't just about enduring the cold. Physically, it was about surviving mentally as well. You wake up in the morning and the reality of medieval winter hits you again. Your home is still freezing. No matter how many blankets you pile on or how close you sleep to the fire, the chill creeps back in every time you get out of bed. The dampness in the air is palpable, making it impossible to get warm. And if you're lucky enough to have a roof over your head, you're still fighting against the cold creeping through cracks. If the wind is particularly harsh that day, you can. Even here, it's howling outside, taunting you. The world beyond your doorstep is covered in a blanket of snow. The trees stand bare and skeletal, and all you want is to remain tucked under your woolen blankets, safe from the elements. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But here's the issue. You can't stay in bed forever. You have to get up, put on layers of woolen tunics, furs, or whatever other clothing you have. Footwear. That'll be a pair of rough boots, maybe made of leather, if you're lucky. The ground outside is a treacherous frozen wasteland. The roads, typically mud or dirt, are now hard-packed ice or covered with thick layers of snow, making traveling an arduous task. Historians debate whether the medieval winters truly crippled daily life, or whether people were simply more accustomed to the cold than we imagine. Some say people were forced to adjust, relying on natural resources like animal skins and thick layers of clothing to stay warm, while others argue the winters were so brutal that entire villages sometimes isolated themselves, unable to function properly. Either way, getting from point A to point B, even just to fetch water or find food, becomes a challenge. And let's talk about that water, shall we? If you're not in one of the bigger towns with a well or access to streams that don't freeze, your water source is probably an ice-encrusted river or a frozen pond. Getting to that water requires you to chop through layers of ice, and you're lucky if you have enough firewood to keep the water from freezing after you collect it. That means even basic chores like fetching water become exhausting efforts. In the dead of winter, the food situation isn't much better. With the earth frozen and your crops either long gone or unable to grow, you're left relying on what's been stored. Grain is a staple, but it's likely to be a little moldy, and any vegetables you've stored are probably shriveled and tasteless. You may have some salted meat, assuming the harvest was plentiful enough to preserve anything at all. But even then, it's tough, chewy, and difficult to swallow after weeks of eating the same thing. Eating is no longer about enjoyment. About survival, historians still debate whether the medieval food preservation techniques truly prepared people for the harsh winters, or if it was always a struggle to make it through. Some suggest that the use of salted meats, dried fruits, and grains was enough to get people by, while others argue that the scarcity of fresh food and the often poor quality of preserved goods made winters even more brutal. Either way, food was not a comfort during these months. It was just another challenge in the battle against the cold. And don't even get me started on how hard it is to keep the fire going during this cold. With a constant demand for firewood, your supply runs out fast, and you're left with little more than a smoldering ember in the hearth. The firewood you gather is wet or green, meaning it doesn't burn properly, and every time you add a log, you hope that it'll light before it snuffs out. The idea of lounging near a warm hearth, basking in the glow of a crackling fire, that's more of a dream than a reality during medieval winters. Historians argue whether fires in medieval homes were truly effective against the cold, or if they were simply a means to keep some warmth in a very cold place. Many believe that homes were simply too large and the insulation too poor to provide lasting comfort. Other historians argue that fire pits and hearths were central to medieval living, providing a rare place of social interaction and warmth, but never enough to defeat the cold entirely. So, as the days get darker and the cold becomes unbearable, you realize this brutal winter isn't just about surviving physically, it's about enduring mentally. The isolation, the bitter cold, and the constant strain on your body and mind lead you to question how much longer you can last. But back then, people had no choice. They just had to keep going, day after day. Now, with the cold continuing to seep into every crevice of your life, your home becomes less a sanctuary and more a battleground against nature itself. You may think that with enough wool, enough layers of fur and leather, you can escape it. But the reality is harsh. It's not just the chill in the air, it's the dampness that clings to everything. The moisture in your walls, your floors, your food, everything carries a wetness that adds to the chill. And if you happen to be in the countryside, away from the larger towns and cities, your home is even more exposed to the elements. No big stone walls to protect you, just mud brick walls and thatched roofs that let in more than just the cold dot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe. Down now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you trudge through the cold mornings, you notice that every part of your life is tied to the seasons. Your clothing, what little you have, is thick but uncomfortable. The wool might keep your body warm for a short while, but it chafes and itches, making the already long days feel even longer. And as you move through your day, constantly battling the chill, it's easy to forget how vulnerable you really are. The woolen tunics and wool-lined boots that are supposed to offer some comfort simply cannot fight off the relentless cold that has become your constant companion. Historians often debate how much medieval people understood about their vulnerability to the cold. Did they know how dangerous it was to stay exposed to the elements for too long? Or did they simply accept it as part of life? Some suggest that medieval folk were able to tolerate cold better due to their more active lifestyles. They didn't have the luxuries we do today, and physical endurance was key to survival. Others argue that, while they could endure the cold, it wore them down mentally and physically, contributing to poor health, injuries, and even early death. The fact remains, medieval winters were a force to be reckoned with as the days drag on. You begin to notice the long-lasting effects of the coldest, especially on your body. The exposure to freezing temperatures isn't just uncomfortable. It can result in frostbite, which can leave you with permanent damage. A few days spent walking in snow or sitting in damp clothes, and your fingers, toes, and even your nose begin to turn an ominous shade of blue. You don't have the warm comforts of modern life, no heated blankets, no dry clothes to change into. The warmth of the fire might give you temporary relief, but as soon as you leave its proximity, you're back to fighting the chill. And if you're unlucky, the frostbite can set in, numbing your limbs and making it impossible to carry on with your daily duties. Historians still argue whether frostbite was a real concern for the medieval populations, or if they adapted so much to the cold that it was simply part of daily life. Some suggest that medieval people were often unaware of the dangers of frostbite, simply brushing it off as something to deal with in the tough climate. Others suggest they had a better understanding of how to protect themselves from the cold, relying on practical clothing choices and methods for warming their bodies in the long winters. But in the end, whatever understanding existed didn't always protect you from the deadly consequences of prolonged exposure to freezing conditions. And the cold isn't your only worry. Food becomes a scarcity. The harvests have been frozen under thick blankets of snow, and any crops left to endure through the winter are withered, shriveled, and mostly unfit for consumption. The stores of grain and vegetables you've tried to save won't last. Droughts and famine are real threats during the harsh winters, and the impoverished often suffer the most. In the months leading up to winter, you might have managed to save some dried meats, grains, or salt-preserved vegetables, but even these stores are dwindling as time passes. If the snow is too thick to travel, your access to fresh food is severely limited, and your daily rations become just enough to get by, not to nourish. Historians argue over how medieval societies handled food scarcity during the winter. Some suggest that large communal feasts helped mitigate some of the hardship, with wealthier families or villages using their stores to support the community. Others argue that the winter months were simply a battle for survival, and that families often turned to desperation, eating whatever they could find to keep themselves alive. The reality is harsh. No matter how much preparation you put into your stores, food becomes an increasingly rare commodity. The medieval world didn't have the luxury of refrigeration, and once your stores were gone, so was your access to food for the winter. As the winter deepens, the cold doesn't just affect the people, it takes a toll on animals too. You're not alone in this struggle. If you're a farmer, you depend on your livestock to get you through the harsh season. But the cold doesn't spare them either. Your horses, cows, goats, and chickens are not designed to survive the bitter chill of the medieval winter, and you have to take extra care to make sure they stay alive. Without heated barns or proper shelter, your animals will suffer. The cold brings its own set of problems, from frozen water sources to weak animals unable to endure the temperatures. Even your best-kept livestock may die from the cold or lack of food. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Even the best prepared farmer finds themselves facing a constant struggle to keep their animals alive. You'll need to dig through snow to find a patch of grass to feed them, or rely on dried hay and straw to get them through. But food is running low, and you're left with the grim knowledge that without enough fodder, your animals may simply starve to death. It's not just the livestock that's affected by the winter wild animals. Too, become harder to find as they retreat into shelters of their own. Hunting in these conditions is treacherous. The cold slows you down, and the snow hides the tracks of your quarry. Even when you're lucky enough to find something to hunt, it's a battle to bring it home before the frostbite sets in, making it all too easy for even the most experienced hunter to lose their way. Historians still debate the livestock conditions in medieval winters. Some argue that the winter months were an integral part of agricultural life, where farmers worked hard to ensure their animals survived the season. Others argue that weather conditions were unpredictable, and many people suffered from starvation, or the loss of livestock during harsh winters. Either way, animals weren't just part of the medieval world, they were vital to survival. And their loss could mean disaster for a family or village. The animals also had their own natural defenses against the cold, but those didn't always work in the face of brutal winters. Chickens, for example, can survive the cold to some extent, but they need a warm place to huddle. Without sufficient shelter, they could freeze to death, leaving you with fewer resources to get by. Larger livestock like cattle may be tougher, but the harsh winter still brings threats like frozen hooves, frostbite, and even disease caused by the cold, which can easily wipe out a whole herd. With no access to modern medical supplies or even basic veterinary care, you are left to deal with the aftermath of founs, seeing your beloved animals die because of something as simple as a frozen teat or pneumonia. Historians argue whether animal husbandry in the Middle Ages was more about survival or sacrifice. Some believe it was an essential part of life, a source of food, warmth, and labor, while others suggest it was a way of showing status or maintaining traditions that were more symbolic than practical. Regardless, animals played a huge role in survival, and their well-being often meant the difference between life and death during the brutal winters. As the winter days grow longer and colder, the mental strain of it all can weigh heavily on you. Being constantly cold, hungry, and isolated in a frozen world takes its toll on the human psyche. It's not just about staying warm, it's about the uncertainty of survival. How long will the cold last? How long until your stores run out? How much longer can you keep your animals alive? And then, as if that wasn't enough, there's the constant fear of sickness. The cold air isn't just miserable, it brings with it a host of diseases: flu, pneumonia, and other ailments that spread more quickly in these conditions. Your immunity is already weakened by the cold, and the lack of food doesn't help. Winter doesn't just wear you down physically, does so mentally, too. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly understood the connection between cold weather and sickness, or whether they just accepted it as part of life. Some believe that the cold contributed to higher rates of illness, but wasn't seen as a direct cause. Others suggest that medieval people were simply unaware of the importance of hygiene, or of how environmental factors directly contributed to their sicknesses. Either way, when the temperature plummeted and the snow piled up. You were left fighting not just to stay alive, but to hold on to your sanity in the bleakest of times. As the cold and darkness stretch on, it's not just the lack of food and the freezing temperatures that wear you down. It's the dangerous travel conditions. Winter might make you feel like you're trapped inside your own home, but sometimes you still have to venture out, whether to check on your neighbors, deliver food, or attend to the family business. And every time you set foot outside, you face a world covered in snow and ice, making every step an ordeal. You're already bundled up in layers of wool, fur, and leather. But even these won't stop the biting cold from creeping into your bones. As you trudge through snowdrifts, the icy winds whip at your face and hands. And the roads, which are usually mud, are now slick with ice. Travel isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. In fact, traveling in the medieval winter was considered one of the riskiest endeavors. The roads are treacherous, and the chance of slipping and falling on the icy paths is high. Even if you make it to your destination, you're still left with the risk of frostbite from exposure to the cold, which can take root in just a few minutes. If you're caught out too long before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. And it's not just the cold that's a threat on the roads. You also have to contend with snowstorms that come out of nowhere, turning a manageable journey into an outright battle for survival. Visibility drops to almost zero. The ground beneath your feet becomes invisible, and all you can do is try to feel your way forward, hoping that your tracks are still there when you need them. Snowdrifts pile up on roads, making paths impassable. And let's not even think about trying to cross rivers. The icy waters may be shallow during the warmer months, but now they're frozen solid, and that's a hazard in itself. Historians argue whether medieval people understood the dangers of traveling in winter, or if they simply didn't have the luxury of avoiding it. Some say they were far more resilient, walking long distances and making do with what they had, while others believe that people would stay inside, relying on their local communities and the limited resources they had during the colder months. Either way, the winter months left everyone vulnerable, from peasants to nobles to the relentless elements. If you were traveling, it wasn't just the weather that posed a threat, it was also the wild animals that became more desperate in the winter months. Predators, like wolves or even starving dogs, would often follow human tracks, hoping to scavenge whatever they could. In the dark, cold forests, you were never really safe. The howls of wolves in the distance, the snap of twigs underfoot, these were the sounds that could keep you up at night. And it wasn't just animals that posed a threat. Bandits, too, were bolder during the winter months, taking advantage of the snow-covered landscapes to ambush travelers. Knowing that it was harder for people to escape or defend themselves in these conditions, historians debate whether the banditry in medieval winters was more dangerous than the cold itself. Some believe that thieves thrived in the winter, preying on travelers who were too cold, hungry, or tired to fight back, while others suggest that it was the cold that truly forced people into vulnerable positions, driving them into the hands of criminals. In either case, the lack of proper security combined with the struggling economy made for a volatile mix during the winter. With the roads dangerous and your survival at stake, you'd be lucky to make it back home safely, alone with supplies to last through the winter. Even if you've stocked up on essentials, there's the constant worry that it won't be enough. Food reserves, firewood, these supplies dwindle faster than you can imagine. Your journey back from the market could be cut short by another snowstorm, or worse. You might return to find that your home has been looted, or that your food stores have frozen over or been ruined. Historians still argue whether the risk of travel during winter in the medieval period was greater than the risk of staying at home and dealing with indoor conditions. Some suggest that even the most cautious villagers had to venture out during winter to trade and gather supplies, making their daily lives a game of calculated risk. Others believe that people had a much more isolated existence during the colder months, staying close to home and waiting for spring to bring better weather and more reliable routes of survival. Regardless, traveling in medieval winters meant that you were constantly facing the unknown, the wind, the animals, and the brutal cold. Now that you've braved the treacherous journey back home, you might think you've escaped the worst of it, right? Not so fast. Medieval winters weren't just about surviving the cold while you were outside. When you step inside your home, you might be met with the dampness that permeates everything. Your walls are soaked, your floorboards are warped from the moisture and that drafty chimney. It's about to make you even colder. The simple act of staying inside should offer some comfort. But in medieval times, being indoors was almost as tough as facing the outside elements. And don't even think about the smoke in the air from your fire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Once you're inside, the struggle isn't over. You'd expect some relief from the cold, but the walls of your house have absorbed the chill from the night, and the temperature in your home remains just above freezing. Heating sources are minimal, relying on wooden fires, and if you're lucky enough to have a fireplace, it's only a small respite from the biting cold. The fire might offer a little warmth, but it's also filling your living space with smoke. The smoke sticks to the walls, to the ceiling, to your clothes. Your eyes sting and your throat feels scratchy. You open the window to get some fresh air, but that only lets in more of the cold. Historians still argue whether the stew-filled homes of medieval winters were an accepted part of daily life or a genuine problem. Some suggest that people had no choice but to deal with the smoke, since they relied so heavily on fire for warmth and cooking. Others argue that medieval people were much more adapted to their environment and simply lived with the discomforts. Whether it was smoke, poor air quality, or being cold all the time, either way, it's clear that the indoors weren't much of a refuge from the harsh realities of medieval winters. And let's not forget about the frozen food situation. If you're lucky enough to have food stores at all, chances are you've got some meat preserved with salt or in barrels. The meat may not taste great after sitting in the cold for months, but its food, vegetables, well, they're probably frozen or rotten, and whatever food you have left is getting stale and moldy. You'll eat what you can, but as the cold sets in, you'll soon find yourself hungry more often than not. The scarcity of food during medieval winters meant that people often had to rely on whatever meager resources they could scrape together just to survive. Historians still debate how much the winter food crisis impacted medieval life. Some argue that people were better prepared than we give them credit for, storing salted meats and dried grains throughout the year, while others suggest that winters were a desperate time for those who couldn't afford to stock up. Either way, food was scarce and hard to come by. But the struggle didn't end there. If you didn't store enough food and your livestock didn't survive the winter, you might find yourself starving. The freezing temperatures didn't only impact your physical health, they took a toll on your mental health as well. There's something incredibly depressing about the long, dark days of winter. The absence of sunlight, combined with the cold and the constant fear of hunger, makes it feel like there's no end to the season. If you're lucky, there might be a few medieval festivals or gatherings to lift your spirits. But these are often brief, and the cold quickly drives you back to isolation. The lack of daylight means you spend much more time indoors than you'd like. and that solitude can feel suffocating. Historians argue whether the mental toll of winter was truly understood in medieval times. Some believe that the medieval people, living in a constant state of struggle, simply accepted the bleakness and dealt with it as best as they could. Others believe that the harsh winters had more of a psychological impact, causing depression and despair to settle in on those who lived through the endless cold. Either way, the mental effects of the medieval winter were just as real as the physical challenges. So, as you curl up by the fire, trying to find some comfort in a damp, smoke-filled room, the reality sets in. Surviving this winter will be a test of endurance. It's not just about getting through the cold or the hunger. It's about keeping your spirit intact through the endless days of isolation, darkness, and fear. Winter isn't just brutal on your body, it also takes a toll on the very heart of medieval society, agriculture. As the cold sets in, the harshest truth reveals itself. Crops that thrived during the warmer months are now either frozen solid or completely barren. It's a brutal reminder of how dependent the medieval world was on the land. Your survival depends on harvests, and when those crops fail or freeze, it's more than just an inconvenience, it's a disaster. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. When the ground freezes, it's not just the crops that you lose. You lose the entire farming cycle that affects everything from the food you eat to the economy of the region. Your fields are buried beneath a thick layer of snow, making it impossible to plant or harvest anything. Animal husbandry becomes a life or death situation. How can you feed your animals when there's no pasture for them to graze? You have to make do with dried fodder, but even that is limited. If the snow keeps falling and the cold doesn't, let up, your livestock becomes scarcer and weaker. What's worse, without a steady food source, they become more susceptible to diseases. Historians argue whether medieval farming communities had the resources to combat the effects of frozen ground and the cold. Some suggest that farming communities relied on winter markets where they could purchase food that had been preserved or stored. Others argued that the loss of crops led to starvation, with medieval winters being periods of constant scarcity. Either way, it's a fight for survival without crops, without animals. The ability to endure the winter depends on how well prepared you are. And most medieval folk weren't prepared to handle such a stark, unyielding season. You try to make do, surviving on whatever grains you have left. Perhaps a bit of cheese or salted meats, but it's a constant fight against hunger. Cold gnaws at you, not just physically, but mentally too. There's something about staring out at the barren land, watching as nature itself seems to sleep, that reminds you of your own fragility. Famine, real or imagined, is a constant fear, and you wonder how long it will be before you run out of food. Historians still debate whether medieval people truly understood the cycle of agricultural seasons in relation to weather patterns, or if they simply reacted to the circumstances. Some believe people had deep traditional knowledge passed down through generations about how to handle bad harvests and how to plan for winter. Others argued that medieval farming was a game of chance where bad weather could spell the end of an entire family or village. Either way, the brutality of winter, with its frozen crops and barren lands, was a constant threat to life. And it's not just the food supply that falters, it's the very heart of the medieval economy. Without successful harvests, without the ability to trade food, people begin to hoard what little they have. And what might have once been a vibrant market now becomes a scene of desperation. Money becomes less valuable when there's nothing to buy, and the few goods you can find are exorbitantly priced, if you can even get to them. The wealth gap widens even more during the winter months. as the rich huddle in large estates with resources that allow them to weather the storm, while the poor have to rely on what little they can scrape together. Historians argue whether medieval economic disparity became more pronounced during the cold months. Some argue that the wealthy were able to buy their way out of the troubles winter brought, while others suggest that even the noble classes had their own struggles to face. Either way, winter magnifies the inequalities of medieval society, exposing just how fragile people's survival really is when the cold sets in. But even if you manage to get through the winter, there's always the aftermath toll that winter leaves on the land, your health, and your spirit. The thaw brings some relief, but it also brings new challenges. The snow melts, turning the earth into a swamp, making plowing and planting just as difficult as surviving the cold. As the year rolls on, you're left to wonder, will this cycle ever end, or will every winter simply feel like the next, unbearable? Struggle. Historians still argue about how deeply ingrained the fear of winter and famine was in medieval society. Some say it was simply part of life that people accepted with grim resolve. Others suggest it haunted their every decision, shaping seasonal festivals, rituals, and laws aimed at protecting the vulnerable. Either way, the impact of winter on medieval life was far-reaching, leaving its mark on everything from food and economy to health and social structure. By now, you're used to the grim routine of winter survival. But there's still one aspect of medieval winters that you can't escape: the sickness. The cold isn't just a nuisance, it's an invitation for disease. When the temperatures drop, your immune system doesn't just struggle to keep up, it's practically overwhelmed. The long nights, poor nutrition, and lack of sunlight make it impossible for your body to function at its best. It's not just the cold that can kill you. It's the diseases that thrive in these harsh conditions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The most common illness during medieval winters wasn't the flu or a cold like we know today, was a host of infections. From pneumonia to tuberculosis, from frostbite to skin sores. The cold weakens your body's ability to fend off these afflictions. With little to no access to modern medicine, even the smallest illness could become life-threatening. If your body is already struggling with the cold, it doesn't have the energy to fight off a bacterial or viral infection. As soon as one of these diseases sets in, your odds of survival go from bad to worse. Historians argue whether medieval people had a clear understanding of how diseases spread during the winter months. Some suggest that they were more resilient, living with diseases as a constant companion, while others argue that the cold months were a period of constant fear, as every cough or fever was a potential death sentence. Either way, winters brought an onslaught of sickness, with poor sanitation, cramped living spaces, and the constant exposure to the elements. Diseases like plague, smallpox, and the common cold spread rapidly. Even more dangerous were wintertime. Infections caused by cuts or wounds that couldn't properly heal due to the cold. A simple scrape could turn into a life-threatening infection, especially when your body is already fighting off the cold as the winter wears on. It becomes harder to tell whether it's the cold or the diseases that are doing the most damage. At least the cold is predictably, it's the diseases that come without warning, spreading through your community like wildfire. Every cough, every ache, is a reminder of how fragile your life really is. Your body's constant battle with the chill, combined with your exposure to illness, creates a perfect storm for death during these harsh months. Historians debate whether the high mortality rate during medieval winters was primarily due to the cold itself or the lack of proper health care. Some believe that the cold was the perfect incubator for disease, while others argued that medieval people could survive the cold if they had enough food, warmth, and protection. But one thing is certain: disease, like the cold, was a constant. Threat and your chances of survival were limited by how well you could handle both, with little to no knowledge of hygiene, sanitation, or medicine. You had to rely on folk remedies or simply hope for the best. The social isolation of winter exacerbates these conditions. When people are cut off from their communities, it becomes far harder to recover from illnesses. Without the support of neighbors or family, survival becomes a much more individual affair. Even if you manage to stay somewhat healthy, the sheer mental strain of winter can wear you down. Days spent indoors, listening to the howling wind and enduring the endless cold, take their toll on your mind. And when someone does get sick, the fears of contagion rise. No one wants to be near a sick person, but no one wants to risk losing them either. It's a delicate balance, and winter sickness often brings more than just physical pain. It brings a mental and emotional burden that can't be measured. And what about death during the winter months? If someone in your family dies, it's not just a matter of mourning. Preparing the body is an entirely different ordeal in the cold. Bodies freeze, making them difficult to embalm or prepare for burial. The ground itself is frozen solid, making digging graves a grueling and difficult task. You have to wait for the thaw, sometimes for weeks, just to give your loved one a proper burial. The winter months turn death into a long, drawn-out process, both physically and emotionally. It's not just the death of one person, but the emotional toll it takes on an entire community as they battle their own mortality in the freezing cold. Historians continue to debate how medieval societies coped with the deaths that came during these brutal winters. Some argue that rituals and spiritual beliefs provided comfort and a sense of control over the inevitable, while others suggest that death during winter became so common that it was simply accepted as part of life. Either way, it wasn't just the cold or the isolation that caused so many deaths. It was the combination of factors that made medieval winters truly brutal, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically as well. As the winter drags on, the reality sets in. You're exhausted. It's not just the cold, the hunger, or the constant threat of disease. It's the mental toll of knowing that every day you're merely surviving, not living. There's no time for relaxation, no time to enjoy life, because life is about endurance. The long, endless stretch of cold is suffocating, and it feels like you'll never see warmth again. Even the small victories, getting food, finding firewood, surviving another freezing night, become exhausting efforts rather than reasons for celebration. Winter isn't just a season, it's a test of endurance, and it never lets up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The weight of survival during medieval winters wasn't just about getting through each day, was about the psychological battle you had to face. Isolation, monotony, and the constant struggle to stay warm and fed were things you simply had to endure. There were no distractions, no modern conveniences to take your mind off the hardship. The cold, that ever-present enemy, never gave you a break. And as the days stretch on and the snow piles higher, the mental strain starts to take over. It's hard to remain hopeful when everything around you seems to be pushing you toward despair. Historians still debate whether medieval people had a way of coping with these grueling winters, or if they were simply forced to survive without any emotional or psychological outlet. Some suggest that the rituals of the time, prayers, festivals, community gatherings provided much-needed respite from the harsh conditions, while others argue that the mental strain was so intense that people simply shut down, living in a constant state of fatigue and fear. Either way, the impact of winter was more than just physical heat. It was a deeply psychological battle that didn't just freeze the body, but also the spirit. And if you think you're going to escape winter by sleeping it off, think again. The medieval world didn't offer much in the way of comfort during the cold months. Beds were basic, with straw mattresses or at best, woolen blankets that didn't keep out the cold. The sheets were likely thin, the pillows sparse. Even if you could find rest, the constant cold never allowed you to sleep soundly. Every shift in the night reminded you that you were cold, and every creak in the house made you wonder if the snow was piling up outside or if your walls were leaking cold air. Historians argue whether the medieval concept of sleep was fundamentally different from what we know today. Some suggest that people in medieval times simply adapted to living with less sleep, working hard through the cold days, and then resting when they could. Others believe that the lack of warmth, coupled with the mental strain, led to chronic exhaustion, contributing to a cycle of fatigue and illness that was part of the brutal winter experience. Either way, sleep wasn't a comfortable escape, it was a necessity. And it didn't come easily. The longer the winter lasts, the more you feel it. The emotional toll of being trapped. The cold makes everything harder. Simple tasks gathering wood, walking to the market, even preparing food are more grueling than usual. You're not just fighting the weather, you're fighting the slowness of everything. The tasks that seemed simple in the warmer months now seem like endless battles. The weather, once something you took for granted, now defines your entire life. Historians still debate the mental impacts of medieval winter isolation. Some believe that winters were seen as a season of retreat, a time to reflect and recharge, before the busier spring and summer months. Others argue that the deep isolation, combined with the physical hardships, led to despair and mental exhaustion, which were rarely recognized in the medieval world. Either way, the reality was that survival wasn't just about fighting the cold. It was about maintaining some sense of stability amidst a season that stripped away comfort, social interaction, and even hope. So, as the frost deepens and the cold becomes unbearable, you feel the weight of winter in every corner of your life. The long stretches of night, the cold walls, the constant battle for warmth and food, everything is designed to wear you down. It's not just about enduring the cold. It's about enduring everything else that comes with it, the psychological strain, the loneliness, the hunger. When the winter ends, it's not just your body that's worn out, it's your soul too. By now, the reality of winter's toll on your mind and body is undeniable. The days feel endless, the nights even longer, and every new day feels like it's more about survival than living. The isolation you feel from your community, compounded by the ever-present cold, gnaws away at your spirit. Even the most simple comforts of life, like a warm meal, a friendly conversation, or a walk under the sun, seem far away, like things you only see in dreams. In this state, you begin to wonder if you'll make it through or if the harsh winter will claim you, just as it has claimed so many before. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe down now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's not just the physical exhaustion. Anymore, it's the mental toll that becomes unbearable. With each passing day, the cold grows more oppressive. The sheer weight of winter survival starts to warp your sense of time. The days blur together and you lose track of how long you've been living like this. You barely remember what warmth felt like. You start to forget the simple pleasures of life. The feeling of a fire that actually warms you, the taste of fresh food, the sight of green fields, or the sensation of sunlight on your skin. Historians still debate whether people in Medieval times truly understood how deep winter's effects ran both on their bodies and their minds. Some argue that medieval people accepted hardship as part of their existence, seeing it as normal to live in a perpetual state of discomfort. Others suggest that the cold months had a far-reaching psychological impact, contributing to mental illness, depression, and a constant sense of unease. Either way, one thing is certain: the medieval winter didn't just physically wear you down, it invaded your sense of self, leaving you in a perpetual state of survival mode. As you drag yourself through each cold day, you begin to see how much the winter impacts your relationships too. When resources are scarce, when you're hungry, and when you're constantly fighting the cold, your patience wears thin. The tensions among your family and neighbors become more pronounced. Everyone is on edge, constantly fighting against the elements, against hunger, and against the cold. There's no escaping the frustration of the situation. Arguments rise, and resentment builds. What was once a tight-knit community becomes a group of people struggling to survive, with trust in short supply. The cold doesn't just separate you from the outside world, it separates you from the people closest to you. When there's no warmth to be found in the environment, it's easy to feel that there's no warmth in human connection either. Historians argue whether the harsh winter seasons truly drove people apart, or whether it created a sense of solidarity. Some suggest that difficult winters brought communities closer, forcing them to rely on each other for survival. Others argue that the stress of food shortages, disease, and cold caused fractures in the very foundation of medieval society. Whether it brought unity or division, the reality was clear. Winter was a test not just of your body, but of your relationships, your ability to work with others, and your will to survive. And then there's the slow grind of your daily routine. You wake up, get dressed in the same layers, check your fire, check your food stores, and repeat the cycle. Every day feels the same. Even when the worst of the cold passes, you still live with a kind of resignation to the season. There's no escape, and the grind of winter wears down even the most optimistic of souls. When you're stuck in this cycle for months, it becomes less about living and more about enduring. You do the necessary tasks, but they're all just part of a long, unbroken stretch of cold and hardship. You feel like you're moving in slow motion, and you can barely remember what it's like to feel comfortable or safe. Historians debate how medieval people dealt with this sense of stagnation. Were they simply more resilient than we give them credit for? Did they have ways of coping with the mental exhaustion of long winters? Some suggest that rituals and festivals helped break the monotony, giving people moments of joy amidst the cold. Others argue that the sheer pressure of winter left people with little time to even think about mental wellness, as survival took precedence over everything else. Either way, the stagnation of winter was something that everyone had to contend with, and it was a reminder of just how fragile life could be. As the days stretch on, the snow seems to pile higher, the cold seems to grow more intense, and all you can think about is surviving until the first signs of spring. But in a medieval winter, spring doesn't come fast enough. Every day, you wake up and hope for a thaw, but you know that even when it comes, you'll still be left with the remnants of a season that's left its mark on you. The toll of the winter lingers long after the snow melts, and it's not just your body that's worn down, it's your spirit too. As the season drags on, you begin to feel that the winter's effects are like an endless loop's day, identical to the last. Just another stretch of cold and isolation. The cold might be less oppressive when spring finally begins to peak around the corner, but the mental fatigue it's left behind doesn't just disappear. You'll have to face the consequences of winter's toll on your body, your resources, and, most notably, your health. The diseases that ran rampant during the cold months don't simply vanish with the first hint of warmth. You may have managed to survive, but now comes the slow process of recovery. And recovery in the medieval world wasn't quick or easy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ripple effects of a brutal winter last far longer than just the days of freezing temperatures. The frost leaves a permanent scar on the land. Crops are ruined, fields are frozen, and the soil is hard, making it difficult to plant anything new. Even the most well-prepared farmers are faced with the impossible task of rebuilding what was lost during the cold months. In some cases, even the soil itself may not be able to sustain the crops which were damaged by the harsh freeze. You've spent months worrying about survival, and now you face the realization that it will take months more to recover from the devastation. Historians still argue whether medieval agricultural recovery was truly as challenging as we imagine, or whether the resilience of communities allowed them to bounce back quickly. Some suggest that with careful planning, medieval farmers were able to replant crops and get back on their feet. Others argue that the long-term effects of a failed winter harvest could leave entire communities in a state of scarcity for months, or even years. Either way, the challenges were real, and recovery in the wake of a cold winter was a slow process that required the community to work together, often under dire circumstances. Even when spring finally arrives, there is no immediate relief. The snow may have melted, but the land is still too cold, too damp. It's not an instant recovery. It's a gradual process that requires months of work to restore the land and your way of life. You'll likely face the crushing weight of this recovery for much of the year, all the while knowing that the next winter could bring more of the same. If you're left with little more than hope and the knowledge that you have to make do, you can't help but wonder how many more years of this you can survive. Historians argue whether medieval societies were more optimistic about the future despite these setbacks, or whether the prospect of another winter led to a sense of fatalism. Some suggest that people in these societies had no choice but to move forward and rebuild, driven by sheer necessity. Others believe that the constant cycle of hardship during winter left a deep sense of resignation, with people accepting the winter as something they simply had to endure. Either way, the mental and physical toll of the winter left its mark for a long time. It's not just about recovering your land or rebuilding your life. The damage to your health is just as difficult to fix. The constant exposure to the cold, lack of adequate food, and the stress of survival have worn you down. You've likely contracted a variety of illnesses during the long winter months: respiratory diseases, fevers, and even the possibility of scurvy, which can result from a lack of proper nutrition. The brutality of the cold weakens your immune system, and your body, already drained from the demands of survival, is slow to recover. Getting back to full health isn't something that happens overnight. Your body needs time to heal, and even then, it may never be quite the same. Historians debate whether medieval people even had a true concept of recovery from illness or injury. Some believe that they were highly resilient, capable of recovering without the benefit of modern medical knowledge. Others argue that the lack of healthcare meant that many people simply suffered through illnesses, with some never fully recovering from the damage caused by winter. Either way, disease, hunger, and exposure were constant companions during these brutal months. The cycle of winter doesn't just end when the snow melts. The long-term impacts of a brutal winter are felt for months, and the damage it leaves behind can affect an entire community for years. It's a constant struggle, one that requires not just physical endurance, but the mental resolve to keep going in the face of hardship. After surviving winter, the threat of the next winter looms large, and the knowledge that you'll have to face the same challenges again next year can feel like a never-ending cycle of survival. Historians still argue whether medieval societies lived in a constant state of preparation for the next harsh season, or whether they simply learned to accept the brutality of winter as a part of life. Some believe that preparation was a key part of medieval survival, while others suggest that hope and faith were just as crucial. Either way, winter was a defining factor in medieval life, shaping everything from agriculture to society's mental health. And as each year passed, the cycle continued. Survive, recover, and then brace for the next round of brutal cold. With the cold now fading, you begin to see the first signs of spring green shoots breaking through the thawing earth. The sun lingering a little longer in the sky, and the air finally feeling warmer than it has in months. But spring doesn't bring an immediate respite. After surviving the brutal winter, the real challenge begins: rebuilding. The land is still recovering from the deep freeze. The crops you've tried to grow are struggling to push through the hard soil, and your body, weakened by months of battle with the cold, takes its time to find its strength again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The effects of the long winter still weigh heavily on you. Despite the arrival of warmer weather, spring's warmth is a relief, but it's not a cure-all. The land, though thawing, remains weak, and the soil takes time to regain its fertility after months of being frozen solid. Your food stores are running low, and even the most prepared individuals are struggling to get enough to eat. The lack of fresh food during the winter has left you vulnerable to nutrient deficiencies, which slow your recovery. And what little food you now grow doesn't bring back that sense of security you once had. Historians argue whether spring truly marked a period of recovery for medieval people, or whether the process of rebuilding was just another cycle of hardship. Some believe that medieval farmers could bounce back quickly after a hard winter, especially with the help of communal efforts, while others argue that recovery was always slow and painful, and that many communities remained in a constant state of struggle. Either way, winter's effects could be felt for a long time after the thaw. And even the promise of a new season couldn't always lift the burdens that had accumulated during the cold months. But there's one undeniable fact: surviving. The winter, especially in a medieval world without the luxury of modern tools or conveniences, was a test of endurance. And the longer you lived through these brutal winters, the more you began to realize that survival wasn't guaranteed. The elements were an ever-present threat, one that could kill you without warning. But as the warmth begins to return, there's still the lingering question: will next winter be just as bad? Will you be prepared this time, or will you once again be fighting the same battles of hunger, disease, and isolation? Historians still debate whether medieval people were able to truly adapt to the harsh winters, or whether they simply survived them. Some believe that they learned to work together and used their knowledge of the land to better prepare for each winter. Others argue that they lived in a constant state of fear, knowing that another harsh season could wipe out everything they had worked for. Either way, surviving the winter was never just about weathering the cold, it was about enduring everything that came with it: the mental strain, the physical exhaustion, and the constant fight for food, shelter, and health as you work the land, trying to get your crops growing again. There's a quiet realization that the winter you just survived may have been the easiest part of your struggle. The true challenge lies in how you recover and if you'll be able to endure another brutal winter. You fought the cold, the disease, and the hunger, but now the question lingers: will next winter be even worse? The fear of facing the same hardships again is a constant companion, as you know that the battle against winter is never truly over. And as you look out at the thawing earth, there's a strange sense of resignation mixed with hope. You've made it through one winter, but will you survive the next? Historians argue whether the fear of future winters led medieval people to take drastic measures to prepare for them, or whether it was simply something they learned to live with. Some argue that medieval people lived in constant preparation, stockpiling food and supplies long before the cold arrived, while others believe they simply took what the season gave them, hoping for the best. Either way, the future always held the potential for more hardship, and the scars left by the brutal winters of the past never fully healed. The only thing that was certain was that winter would come again, and no one could predict how bad it would be. As you recover from the worst of the winter, you come to realize that the seasonal cycle of survival is unending. Spring may bring some relief, but it's not just about the thawing earth. It's about preparing for the next winter. Each year, you find yourself doing the same things: gathering supplies, tending to crops, and reinforcing the weak points of your home. And each year, you face the constant uncertainty of whether your efforts will be enough to survive the brutal cold that will inevitably return. The cold, the hunger, the disease, it's a relentless cycle that you can't escape. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The thawing earth is a reminder that life goes on, but for you, it's not just about surviving the thoughts, about preparing for the next onslaught. You've got to make sure you have enough food for the next winter. Enough firewood, enough warm clothing, and enough protection for yourself and your family. But the land is slow to recover, and with it, your options are limited. You can only plant what the earth will allow, and if the weather is less than ideal, your crops may not grow as well as you hope. The weather has become a persistent threat, always looming over your efforts, always unpredictable. And you know that it's never safe to assume that everything will go according to plan. Your best laid plans can be undone by a single cold snap or a storm that comes out of nowhere. Historians still argue whether the medieval concept of agricultural resilience truly prepared people for the harsh winters, or if it was a constant gamble. Some argue that medieval societies had stronger bonds to the land and were able to adapt to the challenges of each season, while others suggest that survival was a matter of luck as much as preparation. Either way, the truth remains, no matter how well you prepare, there is always a chance that winter will come again with an even harsher grip than the last. And then there's the psychological toll of knowing that every year you will face the same battle. The winter has left its mark, and while the warmth of spring brings some relief, it's only temporary. The mentality of survival becomes ingrained in your mind. You live each day with the knowledge that winter could return at any time. Even in the warmth of summer, there's the constant nagging thought that the cold will come again. It could be even worse. Fear becomes part of your existence, and with it, the realization that you're never really safe from the elements. You are always, in some way, preparing for the worst. Historians argue whether medieval mental resilience was shaped more by survival instincts or the constant fear of future winters. Some suggest that the cold forced people to develop a deeper connection to the land, to respect its rhythms, while others argue that the psychological strain of surviving the winters left people trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. Either way, winter left its imprint on the medieval psyche, constant, looming presence that shaped not just the seasons, but the lives of every person who lived through it. As the year moves on and the harvest begins to show signs of life, you feel a temporary sense of relief. There's a brief moment when you're able to feel that you've finally escaped winter's grasp, but it's short-lived. Even if you manage to grow a crop, store enough food, and gather all the firewood you need, the memory of the last brutal winter never leaves you. You find yourself counting down the months until the next cycle begins. The cycle of survival, of cold and hunger, of fighting the elements and trying to maintain your grip on life, never ends. Historians debate whether the medieval cycle of seasonal Survival created a sense of hope or resignation. Some believe that the harvests were a symbol of hope, a reminder that despite the challenges, life could continue. Others argue that the constant need to prepare for the next winter created a sense of inevitability, that no matter what you did, you were always at the mercy of the elements. Either way, the long, cold months of winter shaped not just your body, but your mind. And the thaw that brought some relief was always temporary, always followed by the looming fear of the next freeze, as the cycle of seasons continues. You learn to accept that winter is inevitable, but so too is survival. And while each winter feels like it might be the last, you know you'll keep fighting because that's what life in the medieval world is all about: endurance. Whether it's the cold, the hunger, or the isolation, you endure and you continue to survive. And as the sun sets on the last days of winter, you feel that quiet sense of resolve. Another winter will come, and you'll face it just as you always have. As you finally reach the end of another year, you realize the worst of the winter is now behind you. The days are lengthening, the air has softened, and the land is beginning to show signs of life once again. However, the lingering effects of the brutal cold are still present. The physical toll it's taken on your body and your environment doesn't just vanish with the warmth of spring. The harshness of the winter months has shaped your identity, your outlook on life, and how you view the world. The cycle of survival has become ingrained, and it's something you know will repeat year after year. Each season testing your endurance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, while you look out over the thawing land and appreciate the new growth emerging from the soil. There's no mistaking the reality. Winter is coming again. The relief of spring is fleeting, and despite all the efforts you've made to survive, you're already preparing for the next inevitable cold snap. The days may be warmer now, but you know that you can't take anything for granted. The earth may be thawing, but the threat of a brutal winter looms large on the horizon, historians argue. Whether medieval people saw the harshness of winter as a cycle they had to simply endure, or whether they truly felt like they were in control of their fate. Some argue that the adverse conditions of winter led people to develop a deep, pragmatic understanding of survival, teaching them to prepare well in advance and adapt to their environment. Others suggest that medieval people felt helpless, living in a constant state of uncertainty and anxiety, knowing that even their best efforts to prepare for the cold were not enough to guarantee survival. Either way, the cyclical nature of winter meant that each year, people had to face the reality of the cold with the understanding that their survival was never fully guaranteed. But let's not forget that spring is still a time of hope, even in the shadow of the harsh winters you've endured. The days are longer, and there's a brief moment when you can breathe a little easier, seeing the first buds of new life sprouting from the earth. Yet, despite the promising signs, you can't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. What if the next winter is even worse than the last one? The uncertainty is unavoidable, and as you walk through your fields, feeling the soft earth beneath your feet, there's the ever-present knowledge that survival in the coming months will again depend on preparation and resilience. Historians still argue about whether hope truly emerged with the arrival of spring, or whether medieval people saw it as just another temporary reprieve from the relentless cold. Some believe that hope came in the form of gathering resources and preparing for the future, while others suggest that the cycle of hardship made people feel that no matter how much they prepared, it would always be at the mercy of nature. Either way, spring became a time of hope, but also a time of preparation, because no matter how much you hoped, knew that the winter would always return. In a strange way, though, the brutal winters weren't just about survival. They were about resilience. They taught you how to endure, how to fight through the toughest of circumstances, and how to find a way to keep going even when the odds seemed impossible. You learned to work with the land, to adapt to its rhythms, and to deal with the constant uncertainty of what the next season might bring. The cold might have been unrelenting, but so was your will to survive. Historians often debate whether medieval people truly understood how much their resilience shaped their lives. Some believe that they had a deep connection to the land, too, the seasons, and to the cycles of nature, seeing winter as part of a larger, natural order. Others argue that survival was simply a matter of endurance, a constant battle that had to be fought year after year with no guarantees. But no matter how they saw it, one thing is clear: winter had a profound effect on everyone, and it shaped not only society but also individual lives in ways that are hard for us to fully understand today. And as you look out at the frost melting, with the first shoots of new growth pushing through the earth, you understand that survival is never easy. But you've survived, and you'll survive again. The cycle of winter and spring, of death and rebirth, continues on. And while it may be difficult to see the end of it, you know that somehow the will to keep going will always win. With the thaw finally setting in, you begin to realize that survival isn't just about getting through the cold, the hunger, and the isolation. It's about learning to live in the rhythm of the seasons, adapting to the harshness of the winters, and preparing for whatever challenges come with the changing weather. It's a cycle of resilience that will repeat itself every year, rendering the cold, recovering in the spring, and facing the unknown of the next winter. But there's something important about spring. The land may still be recovering from the brutality of winter, but the promise of new life brings with it a fleeting sense of hope. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've made it through another year. But even with the first signs of spring, the reality of the seasons continues to hang over you. As much as the earth begins to thaw and the days grow longer, winter is still never far behind. It's a recurring theme in the medieval world. You're always bracing for the next storm, the next cycle of cold, always wondering if this year will be the one where the survival struggle becomes too much to handle. But as you survey the land, you realize that winter doesn't just disappear, remains a constant threat, like a shadow always looming, just waiting to return. Historians argue whether medieval communities truly accepted the inevitability of winter or whether they lived in a state of perpetual fear. Some believe that medieval folk saw winter as an unavoidable burden, but one they could endure with enough preparation. Others argue that the constant battle against the cold led to a fatalistic mentality, where people simply did what they had to do to survive, without much hope of anything more. Either way, the reality was clear. Every year, winter would return. You had to prepare, you had to endure, and you had to find ways to live through it. But as the days grow longer, and the first signs of warmth creep in, there's still something else you begin to feel: a sense of relief. The relief isn't complete. Of course, the cold doesn't just disappear, it leaves its mark. The mental exhaustion, the lingering sense of vulnerability, and the constant fear of food shortages are still very much a part of life. But for the first time in months, you're warm. You can feel your skin soften, the chill leaving your body. The promise of spring brings a wave of something you haven't felt in a long time: hope. Historians continue to debate whether medieval people truly found any comfort in the arrival of spring. Some believe that the sense of renewal and growth was enough to shake off the gloom of winter and bring new energy to the community. Others argue that the recovery from the winter hardships was slow, and that the transition to spring was more about survival than celebration. Either way, the arrival of spring was the moment when the long stretch of winter came to an end, leaving you with the chance to breathe even, if only for a while. However, no matter how much you embrace the relief that comes with the changing seasons, the thought always lingers in the back of your mind. What if next winter is worse? The unpredictability of nature, the knowledge that the cold could return at any time, leaves you feeling like you're constantly on edge. The question isn't just about surviving next winter. It's about whether you can truly prepare for it. Can you ever be fully ready for the brutality of winter, or is survival always just a matter of chance? Historians still argue whether medieval societies ever felt they could truly prepare for winter, or if they simply adapted to whatever came their way. Some believe that medieval people lived in a state of constant readiness, knowing that the next harsh season could wipe them out. Others suggest that people relied on faith, community, and the knowledge of previous winters to guide their preparations. Either way, the fear of the next winter was always present. Hope could get you through the thawing months, but winter was always a shadow waiting to return. And so, life in the medieval world is defined by the seasons cold and warm, dark and light. But it's the winters that define how people live. They shape everything from agriculture to society, from health to mental strength. And even though winter ends, the preparations for the next one never truly stop. It's a cycle that repeats, year after year, leaving you to wonder how much longer you can keep surviving in a world that never lets up. As you step into the early days of spring, you're aware that the worst of winter might be behind you, but the scars left by the cold are deep. The struggle isn't just physical, it's deeply psychological. You've survived, yes, but the mental toll of those long, cold months is something that doesn't just disappear with the first warm breeze. You carry the weight of the season with you, an ever-present reminder that survival is an ongoing battle, and that nature doesn't care how much you've suffered. You'll have to live with that knowledge, even as the days get warmer and the threat of frost seems like a distant memory. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first signs of life in the form of new leaves and the thawing earth are nothing short of miraculous. Yet, as you observe the land awakening, you know it's not just about the warmth of the sun, it's about the hard work that lies ahead. Spring brings a new set of challenges. The work to replant, the repair of damaged homes, the rebuilding of what winter destroyed, it's all an enormous undertaking. The thaw is necessary, but it also makes the reality of your situation clearer. The deep marks that winter has left on you, your community, and the land are now visible in the growing buds of the plants, the softening earth, and the receding snow. Historians still argue whether the arrival of spring brought true relief to medieval societies, or whether the hard work of rebuilding was seen as yet another extension of winter's burden. Some believe that the new growth of spring brought a much-needed sense of renewal, while others suggest that the physical exhaustion of surviving winter made people feel like they were just moving from one cycle of survival to another. Either way, the transition from winter to spring was more than just a shift in temperature, it was an emotional and psychological shift, one that had its own weight to carry. You realize that even with the earth beginning to heal, the mental scars remain. The cycle of survival has drained you emotionally, physically, and spiritually, and every year you wonder if this will be the one that will break you. Even with new life emerging, you can't help but feel the weight of what's come before. The winter has taken more than just warmth and food. It has taken hope and energy. You struggle to feel fully connected to the promise of spring, as it feels like a brief respite from the ongoing battle of simply living. Historians still argue whether medieval people were able to shake off the mental scars of a brutal winter, or whether these effects lingered throughout the rest of the year. Some believe that people were able to renew their spirits during the spring, using the new growth and warmth as a source of optimism, while others suggest that the exhaustion of surviving winter left people in a constant state of mental fatigue, unable to find the joy they once had in the changing of the seasons. Either way, it's clear that the transition from winter to spring was never a clean break, was a complicated process, fraught with emotional and physical challenges. As spring moves into summer, you feel the warmth on your skin, and yet, there's still that lingering thought, how much longer can I keep going? You've made it through another winter, but the weight of it still hangs over you, affecting how you approach the future. It's not just about the cold anymore, it's about the cycle of survival that you now know too well. The winter's challenge has shaped everything you do, from how you prepare for the next season to how you view your future. You don't just live day to day, you live in the shadow of winter, always aware of its return. Historians debate whether the cycle of survival during medieval winters truly shaped the mental resilience of people or whether it kept them trapped in a cycle of fear. Some suggest that people in the medieval world were better prepared for the hardships of winter because they had learned to accept the seasonal challenges and live in harmony with the land. Others argue that the constant struggle with the cold, hunger, and disease left people in a constant state of mental tension, unable to break free from the cycle of survival. Either way, the impact of medieval winters on the human psyche was profound, affecting everything from personal relationships to community cohesion. And as you sit beneath the sun, feeling the warmth on your face, you can't help but feel the unsettling knowledge that you've already begun preparing for the next winter. Survival has become an instinct, ingrained in your bones, and even as you enjoy the fleeting comfort of warmer weather, the reality of what's to come always hovers at the edges of your thoughts. Winter is never far away, and no matter how much you try to enjoy the sun's warmth, there's always the feeling that you're preparing for battle. As the warmth of spring settles in and life begins to return to the land, there's a strange bitterness in the air. The cycle of survival is relentless, and you know that even as you plant your crops and tend to your animals, the quiet knowledge of the upcoming winter never really leaves. Winter is more than just a season, it's a part of your identity. The years of survival, the endless preparation, and the constant awareness that the cold can return at any time weigh heavily on you. Every new seed you plant, every fresh sprout you see emerging from the soil, carries the reminder that winter's shadow is always there, just waiting to fall again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe button. Only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Despite the promise of spring, you know that survival isn't just about the seasons. It's about endurance. Every year, you face the same familiar battle. The cold will come. The land will freeze. And once again, you'll have to fight for your survival. And while spring may offer some relief, it's only temporary. The land is still recovering from the harsh grip of winter, and the resources you've managed to gather will only go so far. Your energy is still depleted. Your strength still fragile from the mental and physical exhaustion of surviving the cold months. Historians argue whether the cycle of survival in medieval times led to an inherent sense of resignation or adaptation. Some suggest that people learn to embrace the hardships, seeing the arrival of each winter as a challenge to be faced and conquered. Others believe that the constant struggle led to a sense of hopelessness, where people lived each year in fear of what the cold would bring. Either way, one thing is clear: surviving winter was not just about enduring the cold, it was about surviving the mental strain that came with it. But spring isn't just a time of regrowth and hope, it's also a time to begin preparing for the future. You've learned that survival requires constant vigilance, and you know that you can't let your guard down, not even as the weather warms and the earth begins to come alive. Every task you take on, from tending to your fields to gathering more firewood's part of a much larger cycle. It's about ensuring that, when winter comes again, you'll have the resources to make it through. The preparation never stops, because you understand the brutal reality of your existence. Winter is always waiting. Historians still debate whether medieval people ever truly escaped the winter cycle mentally. Some suggest that the rhythms of life during these cold months were accepted as part of the natural order, with each year blending seamlessly into the next. Others believe that the psychological toll of knowing winter would always come led to a sense of mental exhaustion that never quite healed. Either way, spring was never truly a time of rest. It was a time to recover, to rebuild, and to begin preparing once more for the inevitable dot. As the days stretch longer and the air grows warmer, Tia, you feel a strange mixture of gratitude and dread. The warmth is a relief, but it comes with the quiet knowledge that winter will return. The seasons will change, the cold will set in again, and you'll find yourself once more preparing for battle. But for now, there's the brief relief of spring, a time to rejuvenate and recharge before the cycle starts again. For now, the land is full of life, and for the first time in months, you can breathe without feeling like you're holding your breath waiting for the next storm to arrive. Historians argue whether spring was truly a time of hope, or if it was simply a temporary break from the cycle of survival. Some suggest that people lived in a constant state of awareness that they had to prepare for the next season, no matter how much they celebrated the warmth. Others believe that the arrival of spring offered a momentary escape from the harshness of winter, providing people with the mental respite they needed to continue. Either way, the relief that spring brings is fleeting, and the cycle of winter will always return. And so, as you look out over the land, feeling the warmth on your skin and hearing the sounds of new life all around you, you can't help but feel the constant weight of winter's shadow. It might be months before the cold comes again, but in the back of your mind, you know it's just a matter of time. But for now, you will enjoy the warmth, the new growth, and the peace that spring brings, knowing that you've made it through. Survival isn't just about getting through the winter, it's about living through the seasons, adapting to the changing world, and enduring everything the earth has to offer. As the year moves forward and the grip of winter fades into the distant past, there's a strange realization that settles in. The seasons have shaped more than just the land or your daily life. They've shaped who you are. The mental strain of winter, the constant battle for survival. The knowledge that every year you would face these hardships again has left its mark. But so too has the resilience required to make it through each cycle. You have learned to adapt, to endure, to survive. And as you stand in the warmth of spring, you can't help but reflect on how much of your life revolves around preparing for what you know is coming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe. Down now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Each year brings with it the promise of new growth, the budding trees, the flowering crops, and the animals giving birth. But there's also the knowledge that as soon as the warmth of spring arrives, the countdown to the next winter begins. You don't just live in the present moment, you live in a constant state of anticipation. You plan, you prepare, and you work tirelessly, knowing that no matter how beautiful the spring is, the cold will return. This cycle of survival isn't just about physical endurance, it's about learning to live with uncertainty, about understanding that no matter how much you prepare, nature is still unpredictable. And in that unpredictability lies both the challenge and the beauty of life. Historians debate whether medieval societies truly understood the cycle of survival, or whether they simply endured it without questioning. Some argue that the medieval understanding of the seasons was deeply tied to faith and ritual, while others suggest that the constant struggle for survival left people in a state of perpetual awareness, always looking ahead to the next challenge. Either way, one thing is certain: winter and its aftermath shape the rhythms of daily life in profound ways, influencing everything from work schedules to social interactions. With each passing day, the land seems to recover more from the winters. Grasp, but you can't ignore the reality that it's never truly over. The long days of summer may offer comfort, but the threat of winter is always just beneath the surface. The harsh season might be months away, but that doesn't stop you from planning ahead, making sure you have enough grain, enough firewood, and enough warm clothing to make it through. The winters you've survived have taught you one key lesson: no matter how comfortable the spring and summer feel, winter is never far behind. Historians still debate whether the preparation for winter became a central focus of medieval life. Some suggest that medieval people were skilled at adapting to the cyclical nature of seasons, always preparing in advance for the cold. Others believe that the psychological weight of the endless winter cycle caused people to live in a constant state of fear. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Resilience was key to survival, but fear of the cold weather, acknowledged or not, never fully left people's minds, even as the world begins to bloom again. The days of winter survival remain etched into your memory. Spring is fleeting, but the lessons of winter are permanent. You now carry with you an understanding that the world is always in a state of flux, warmth and cold, life and death, growth and decay. These cycles define everything: your work, your relationships, your very existence. The fear of the unknown, of winter returning, will always be a part of you. It may not always feel like fear sometimes, it's just awareness. A recognition that survival isn't just about enduring a season, but about living through the changes life throws at you. Historians argue whether medieval people truly understood the psychological impact of surviving harsh winters, or whether they simply endured without acknowledging the toll it took. Some suggest that the survival instinct was deeply ingrained in people, and that the cycle of winter made them more resilient, mentally and physically. Others believe that the constant uncertainty of winter brought on a deep sense of dread, knowing that even with their best efforts, survival was never guaranteed. Either way, the reality is clear. Winter was a constant companion, and no matter how many seasons passed, the lessons of survival and preparation were always at the forefront of people's minds. As you stand in the midst of spring, with the warmth of the sun on your face and the promise of new life all around you, you understand? Survival is more than just a physical act. It's a mental and emotional battle, one that shapes every decision you make. And though the future is uncertain, one thing is sure: no matter what comes, you will keep surviving. Because in the world you live in, survival is not just a matter of enduring the cold, but learning to live through it. As the year draws closer to another winter, you've already begun to brace yourself. Spring and summer may have given you a moment to breathe, but that's all they've been: moments. In the back of your mind, the inevitable winter looms, ready to return with the same grueling challenges it always brings. The cycle of survival isn't just about enduring the cold. It's about understanding the patterns of life that winter forces upon you year after year. Every year, you get better at preparing, better at enduring, better at living with the constant threat of nature's bite. But despite your preparations, there's always the unsettling realization you're never truly safe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I'd love to see how far we're reaching across the globe now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. With the coming of another winter, you've learned that survival isn't just about physical endurance, it's about mental fortitude. The long, cold nights, the endless struggle for warmth and food. The mental exhaustion of knowing that no matter how much you prepare, there will always be more to do. You don't just endure the winter, you live with it. It becomes a part of who you are. The fear of the cold, the hunger, the disease that spreads in the freezing air. These are the things that shape you, that make you stronger or break you down. Historians debate whether medieval people truly understood the mental toll of winter. Some believe they viewed winter as a season of renewal, where survival in the cold brought a deeper sense of connection to the land, to the seasons, and to life itself. Others argue that the constant struggle to survive left people in a state of constant alertness, never fully at ease, always expecting the worst. Either way, it's clear that medieval winters forced people to live in a state of constant adaptation, mentally, physically, and emotionally. As you move forward into the next year, you understand that winter is never truly over. Even as the snow melts and the fields are planted, you'll still be mentally preparing for the next harsh season. Survival is not a one-time act. It's an ongoing process that's as much about mental preparation as it is about gathering food or firewood. The next winter may be far away, but it will come. And you'll be ready to face it, just as you've always done. Because that's what life is, a constant cycle of survival, of adapting to whatever the seasons throw at you. Historians still debate whether the people of the Middle Ages lived their lives with a resigned acceptance of the harshness of winter, or whether they truly believed that hope and preparation could overcome the challenges the season brought. Some argue that people saw winter as just another part of life, grinning and bearing it until spring. Others believe that the mental strength of medieval people was tied to a belief in resilience, in the idea that no matter how bad things got, they would always find a way to survive. Either way, it's clear that the medieval winter wasn't just about cold, it was about facing a battle that never really ended in the end. The winter you faced has taught you that survival isn't just about facing the cold or the hunger, it's about endurance. It's about knowing that the battle will always return. And no matter how much you prepare, it's never quite enough to guarantee victory. But you don't stop fighting. You continue to survive. And in that survival, you learn to appreciate the moments when the sun shines a little brighter, when the air isn't as bitter, when life feels like more than just endurance. Winter will return, but so will spring, and with it, another chance to survive, to live, and to endure. Historians often conclude that the harshness of medieval winters shaped the very fabric of medieval life. The cycle of winter and spring wasn't just about the seasons, it was about how people lived, how they prepared, and how they endured. The brutal cold of winter taught people more than how to survive, taught them that survival in the face of such adversity was a powerful act. And as the first signs of spring return, it's a reminder that even the coldest of winters eventually ends, and with it, the promise of renewal.